Morning, everyone. So CeCe will be joining us shortly. I'm here to introduce the Project Lit panel. Project Lit, for those who don't know, started out of a national grassroots literacy movement, a network of dedicated teachers and students who are committed to increasing access to culturally relevant books and promoting a love of reading in our schools and our communities. I'm going to introduce our moderator, Phil Bildner, who's a New York Times best-selling author of numerous books for kids. He's the author of many children's picture books, including the Margaret Wise Brown Prize-winning Marvelous Cornelius, the Texas Bluebonnet Award-winning Shoeless Joe and Blackberry, Martina and Chrissy, 21 Elephants. Phil grew up in Jericho, New York, a Long Island suburb of New York City. After leaving the classroom to write full-time, Phil began chaperoning student volunteer trips to New Orleans to help in post-Hurricane Katrina recovery effort. He founded the NOLA Tree, a nonprofit youth service organization, and served as an executive director. These days, Phil lives in Newburgh, New York with his husband in a 200-year-old farmhouse. Most of the time you'll find him out in the yard playing with his dog named Cat or writing on the back porch. Thank you.
Okay. You can be famous too. Cool. Excellent. So just gotta click it. There you go. Right. Just one time.
Cool, excellent. So that whole thing about Project Lit that he just said, I was gonna say that. but I'll piggyback one thing on. It was actually started by a teacher named Jarrett at Maplewood High School in Nashville, Tennessee. But to say that it was actually started by Jarrett is a little bit of a gross misrepresentation, because it was actually started by Jarrett and his students. In class, they actually did a close reading of an article and a class discussion of an article about book deserts. And they identified the problem, and the students were the ones who said, what can we do about it? How can we be the solution? And now today there are over 900 Project Lit chapters nationwide as a result, and this only started 3 years ago. So welcome to the first ever Project Lit, panel here at the Chappaqua Children's Book Festival. And even though I'm the co-moderator, I do want to call attention to Elizabeth Blye over here, because she's not just the co-moderator, she's like one of the coordinators of this entire thing going on today. So I have no idea how y'all did this, but this is absolutely remarkable, so much respect. So yeah. Okay, so enough with like the Mutual Admiration Society thing going on. Okay, so I guess we'll just dive right into questions. Do you want to start?
Yeah.
Cool. Oh, do they want to like say hello and introduce themselves? Well, you have to do that song thing that y'all said you're gonna do. No, I'm joking.
There's dance to it.
Right, yeah.
Dance.
Wait, okay, I have a mic. I'm doing it. Hi everyone, my name is CeCe. Welcome, CeCe. My name is Mark Oshiro. I'm the author of A Girl is a Gift, which is a YA contemporary, and which got chosen as a Project Lit book for this school year.
What am I going to say?
My name is Julia Roberts. Our mini movie on the screen. I'm CeCe Bell, and I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Beyonce. Absolutely not. My name is Tiffany D. Jackson. I'm the author of Allegedly, Monday's Not Coming, and my newest novel, Let Me Hear a Rhyme. Two books are Project Lit books as well too, Allegedly and Monday's Not Coming.
I'm Jarrett, and I'm the author and illustrator of a graphic novel called New Kid. I've seen this guy like 5 times. We were both up for NEIBA New England Book Awards, so we won those. And we were up for the Harvey Award last night, but one of us won Book of the Year. And we put it up for a Kirkus Award and made the New York Times bestseller list. Yeah. So thank you.
Hi, I am Padma Venkatraman, and I wasn't up for the NEB or whatever, and I was not, or any think these are the things. I'm the author of The Bridge Home, which is a Project Lit selection and a global reader lab this year. So.
Hi, I'm Freddie Prinze Jr. I had a good run in the 90s. My wife and I did the live-action Scooby-Doo movies, maybe you saw that. My name is Jarrett, Krosoczka, and I'm the author and illustrator here because of Project Lit for my graphic memoir, Hey Kiddo, which is about my upbringing being surrounded by addiction and some very colorful grandparents.
So if you, when you're not talking, you can just slide your mics off so it's a little bit. Okay.
Look at that. I mean, we could also just have like, pass it too. Yeah. Perfect. Oh, so now you want to share the mic. You just shut down my idea of sharing the mic, and now you want to share the mic.
I'm not
Only because you won a Harvey last night.
So first, I want to thank all of you for being here. Huge fan. Your books are all in my classroom, right, Brian Jones?
Yes.
So we wanted to start by giving you guys each the opportunity to talk about the book you're promoting. Just tell us a little bit more about it. But instead of asking you to summarize your book, we want to know who's the intended audience. Since there are readers of all ages here today, who is your book best suited for and why?
Excuse me. I wrote my book specifically for the teen reader. So the thing about memoir, I think that there's a difference between telling the story from the perspective of that teenage version of you versus telling that teenage story from the adult perspective of you. And so I got into the head of who I was at 16 and 17 years old. Any knowledge that I had of facts that happened after that, I didn't give those facts to that narrator. And I specifically wanted it to have that teenage voice for teen readers.
My book, The Bridge Home, is about two girls who are sisters and they're separated from each other. So when you hear the voice, it's the voice that I heard in my head of one sister speaking to another. And you have no idea why the two girls are apart. And you follow them as they leave home because they have violent parents and run away, and they find themselves homeless on the streets of India. And they eke out a living there. They meet two boys. They become a little family. They eke out a living and struggle to survive. And I think my book is for anyone who wants to understand those girls and find out why they're separated. And yes, it is for young people, but I do think that all of us never outgrow that, and I hate it when a child or an adult looks at a book and thinks they're too old for it. I think that's awful. Anyway.
So with New Kid, this is probably the first book I've ever done where I cast like as wide a net as I possibly could. Almost like going to a Shrek cartoon, and I would take my kids and they'd be laughing, but I'd be laughing louder than them. So I think with New Kid, Jordan Banks wants to go to art school. He's one of the few kids of color in this predominantly white, predominantly wealthy school. And so I did it for kids who are going through that. But I also did it for teachers interacting with those kids and librarians interacting with those kids and parents, but also getting kids to kind of learn a little bit more about each other and respect each other. Like if you're Chinese, to not call them Japanese, or if you're Dominican, that's not the same as being Puerto Rican. Little nuances like that I think can make it a better class for everyone.
Kelly and Michelle.
Oh, yes. Sherry's been trolling.
Kelly and Michelle. That was good. That was good.
I'm sorry. Okay, so I guess I'll talk about the Project Lit book that's on for this year. So Monday's Not Coming is about a girl whose best friend is missing and no one seems to notice until she shows up 1 year later. Or found 1 year later, I should also say. The book is, I believe that it's intended more so for everyone. everyone, honestly. I agree. Most of my readers, if you read any of my books, and I've probably come to your school or been in your book club. I've noticed my readers could be as young as 10, old as 75. So it really doesn't matter. It's a story that everyone can learn from. It's really a story about friendship, the love between two friends. And also it's about cases that involve missing children, particularly missing children of color, and how they don't get the same sort of attention as when white kids go missing, particularly in media, but also society-wise. So it talks a lot about gentrification, talks about mental health, and it's something that we can all truly learn from. So yeah, I feel like anyone can actually pick up this book, and it seems like a lot of people do, from different, he's mad at me about it, but it's fine.
And we all want to fight you after reading them. Tiffany.
Anger is a gift. If we talk about who it's intended for, I actually wrote it with a very specific intention in mind, but then I'm very happy when people who are not that intended group read it and enjoy it. But I was a brown kid in a school where I was treated like a criminal because of the color of my skin, and we had a resource officer, or multiple of them, where the first time I was arrested was 14 years old. And I say that as I was a high school valedictorian, so it didn't really matter if you were the good kid or the smart kid. So I write for those kids. I write for 16-year-old me who wishes he came out of the closet and had someone to look up to and was the center of a story and got to be the hero. And I also think Anger is a Gift is for, there's this weird notion that children can't read difficult books about challenging things. So I write it for the kids. My intention was to write a book for kids who don't get a choice about the adult things they have to do in their life that are forced upon them. Because that was me. I had to be an adult at 16 years old. And I think there are a lot of kids who relate to that idea that they have to make decisions very, very young because of their circumstances, and I want to center them. But everyone should buy my book because it's good. Yeah, so
Well, after all that thoughtful, I feel really out of place because the book I'm talking about today is called Chip and Brain Smell My Book. So it's rather a little more lighthearted. It's an early reader book, so the intended audience is kindergarten, first grade, and I actually remember learning how to read in the first grade at school, and the book that taught me, or the series of books that taught me how to read were the Dick and Jane books, so Chip and Brain. And so, but it's much more gonzo. But what I love about the Dick and Jane books, and about easy readers in particular, is the repetitive language and how funny it is the more often you say something. And I think I have a fairly severe case of echolalia. I love to say the same things and bother people by repeating over and over and over again. So it's a very natural fit for me to do easy readers. So definitely kids who are just starting to get confident about reading.
All right, so now we're going to ask the next question for our panelists. Has to do with sources of inspiration. We often are asked, what is our favorite book, or what was the most important book we read as a child? But for many of us, it wasn't just a book that changed the course of the trajectory of our lives. It might have been a piece of art, or a visit to a museum, or a theatrical performance or something. So what I'd like to ask of everyone now is, you can answer what was the book that really had that impact on you, but what was that one memorable piece of art that inspired you in ways that other pieces hadn't up until then? And CeCe, we're starting with you this time.
I think for me it's, when I was a kid, I lived 3 blocks from the public library, and by the age of 8 was allowed to walk by myself to go to the library. And because of my hearing loss, I didn't understand it when the librarian said that I could actually check the books out. So I would walk to the library every day to look at one book over and over and over for an entire summer, and that book was a work of art. And it was Ezra Jack Keats' A Snowy Day. And it was the first time I ever remember opening a book and just getting a sense of the design of something. I mean, it's just a perfect design. It's beautiful to look at. The imagery is amazing, and I didn't even think at that point it was something that could be made by a person. It was just so I had to go and visit that book every day, and then eventually I found out that you could take the book home. But by that time I had moved on to this giant Little Nemo book, Little Nemo in Slumberland, and it was so big that you weren't allowed to check it out.
So a lot of my inspiration as a creator, I think a lot about Dr. Reedy and Sims Bishop's whole theory of windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors, because the thing that made me, I always loved books. I read my first adult book when I was 8 years old. It was Stephen King's It. Don't read that at 8. So I was always reading way above my pay grade, so to speak. But I wanted to be an author, but it always seemed like a dream that was super, super far and impossible until I was 14 years old, and my freshman year English teacher assigned us the house on Maple Street by Sandra Cisneros. And where I grew up in California, in the desert, I would say about 75–80% of the kids around me were Latinx, like me. Most of the other kids were black, and we had never read a book where we were the center of a story. And in fact, we would read it, and my kids would start crying in class, and just be like, "There's Spanish in this book, and they're talking about things that I can relate to." And that was such a huge experience for me to see that, to experience it, to be taught it just with the same importance as books I hated reading, but they were still given the same weight, and I really appreciated that. And then on the other flip side of it, to name a non-book thing, which is the character of Ricky from My So-Called Life, which was huge. Not only to see someone struggling with their sexuality, but someone who had the same skin tone as me, and who had mannerisms that I did, and it was huge. I got to meet Wilson Cruz a couple years ago, and 90% of what I said was just sobbing. And he was there, I get it. He was so sweet about it, but he was like, I get it. I constantly have people coming up to me saying, thank you for just being yourself on television. And it was a huge and meaningful thing.
So I get this question a lot, actually, about books that actually inspired me when I was younger. And honestly, there weren't any books that had particularly me as a black girl in black girlhood. There was books that had black girls in it, but it was took place during Civil War, and civil rights movements, or they were super down south, and they had houses with backyards, and I was I don't know what that's about. I'm from Brooklyn, and I think I was missing that. And there were books out there, but they just specifically didn't speak to my experience of just being sort of this nerdy girl who wanted to read nothing but R.L. Stine and went straight from R.L. Stine to Stephen King, so I was the same as Mark in terms of just skipping right ahead. So I didn't really particularly have that, honestly, until college, when I read The Coldest Winter Ever by Sister Souljah. And that was the first book that I actually said I see a girl who actually somewhat talks like me, and I didn't have all the same experiences, because if you've ever read that book, it's okay. But she was a Brooklyn girl from my Brooklyn neighborhood. It felt very real to me, and I was a freshman in college by that point. So it took a while to actually see that. So it's great to see so many books that are coming out now, and for young girls to have that experience, that we're not all the same. Black experience is not monolithic. And as far as a non-book thing, I guess actually it is still a book. It's Mafaro's Beautiful Daughters by John Steptoe. That was a book that was one of those first coloring books my mom brought home, or a book that was in color, I should say, that had these beautiful drawings of black girls in it. And it was the first time I was you can actually be a black girl in a picture book. And it not just be a caricature or an animal. And that was the first time I was we can actually be in books. And I was 7. So that was the first things that really inspired me.
So I I basically went from Dr. Seuss to Spider-Man to literally nothing for years. Was not really a reader, and so for me it was a movie, and it was a movie called Berry Gordy's The Last Dragon. And what I liked about that was, like, while all the sitcoms, all the black sitcoms, they were still calling each other Jive Turkey and, you know, like, What's Happening and Good Times. Like, this was like kids that did stuff like me and my kids, like, they loved Bruce Lee movies, you know, and ate pizza, and nobody died, and it wasn't about slavery or civil rights and stuff. And the slang was like how me and my friends talk. And I remember really getting like goosebumps from that, because I had never seen kids like me portrayed in that. Again, a lot of the books that as I tried to read were, you know, like I said, about slavery or civil rights, and believe it or not, I was not in a gang when I was younger, so I couldn't relate to that either. So most of the life-changing books have come in the last 10 years for me. It's been watching my kids devour Diary of a Wimpy Kid and knowing when the next one was coming out, which is totally unheard of, because, you know, when I grew up, there were no bookstores in Washington Heights and where I grew up. The library was open 24 hours, which was like 4 hours in January, 4 hours in February, and it was like a mausoleum. Like, you would go there and you're afraid to talk, and I just remembered everything being wrapped in plastic. And, like, maybe I've made some of that up, but it's like a Stephen King thing. Like, you would expect Pennywise to come running out of the balloons. So it wasn't an inviting place at all. I went back recently and it's really cool, but that was not what I had. So seeing my kids with Wimpy Kid, and then actually being an author though, and having people give me Smile by Raina Telgemeier, American Born Chinese, Stitches by David Small, that kind of thing. And then still seeing books like Hey Kiddo by, by someone, yeah, he was in by Freddie Prinze Jr. And those really pushed me to churn out content for, like I said, having African American kids in situations that you've not seen them before, in books where they can read and know that no one is actually going to die or have like the weight of the world on their shoulders.
So for me, it was, I was born into a very, very, very wealthy family in India, and when I was about 7 years old, 7 and 8 between that, my parents separated, and suddenly this huge home library that I used to have access to was completely gone. And my mother and I had to be in a tiny flat in this concrete jungle, and she was starting with negative in the bank account, and I had then very, very few books. And one of those books, nearly all the books in our library, unfortunately, were books that were written by British people, and they are the so-called classics. Now, there was this one book that I had such a love, I still have this more hate now than love, but then had a love-hate relationship because it was one of the few in my closet. I would take it out, or shelf, and it was called The Secret Garden. There are lovely things about it, and in a way, when I read that book, it was like I had this secret desire to go back to the big house with the polo ponies and all the rest of it. So I felt like I was going back there, and yet there was such a racist, not just one racist thing, okay? There were so many problems with this book. But one of the racist scenes in which the maid lifts the covers to see the color of Mary's skin, and she has brown skin, and then Mary throws a temper tantrum and says, I'm not one of those. Those is what you're looking at. And when I read that, I was supposed to root for Mary, and I have a disability that doesn't show, so nobody thinks I have anything. But Colin in the book, you can't tell whether he has a disability or not. And then his daddy suddenly loves him when he lets go of his wheelchair and walks. And you want me to believe that this is a good father who only loves his child when his child walks? And it was so difficult for me, this book. And I remember reading this and so many other books in which we, Indians, were the bad people. And I remember getting mad when I was young and thinking, one day I will write books about people like us because we can be heroes. And if there was another book that really charged me up, I'm just going to say two things that both were books, was Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. When I was given that book in college, and I read the lyrical, lovely language, and the nasty, racist message, and this man who had shrunk the entire continent of Africa down to a backdrop for one white man's descent into insanity. I just thought, well, there is a lot of work to be done.
I really like Garfield. Read a lot of Garfield. No. I loved any kind of comics, anywhere I could get comics from the newspaper. You know, we didn't have graphic novels being published for us. I mean, there were graphic novels becoming a thing, but it was like Frank Miller, really dark, intense stuff. And I really loved Batman. And Batman was so many things. There was the really campy Batman TV show, which you could draw a direct line from that to Lunch Lady on how I wrote that book series. The Batman comics could be lighthearted, they could be dark and serious. And I think it's, you know, the support that my grandfather had in that, like he would just drive me to the comic book store and patiently wait for me to go in and spend 30 minutes looking for whatever titles I wanted to get. And like he couldn't look at Facebook on his phone. Like he had his like non-filtered cigarettes and his AM radio and his 8-track to entertain himself while I did that. But then also I had a teacher named Mark Lynch in high school. He taught at the Worcester Art Museum. And everything I thought was like superheroes, right? Which was like really ill-proportioned bodies, especially female bodies, which were just so just gross, the way they were presenting women's bodies on those pages. And I brought in How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way, and he just said, forget everything you learned in that book and follow your own style and follow your own path. And when you were a kid then, like, you didn't see creators making their own characters. You had to write for characters that existed, that someone created 50 years ago, or if you invented a character, the company would own that. So he would bring in books like American Splendor, and he would bring in Art Spiegelman books, like books that, like, you know, we probably wouldn't be allowed to buy at the comic book store, but he wanted to expose us to different kinds of artwork to see what else was possible and follow our own voices.
So Mark kind of mentioned Rudine Sims Bishop. Sorry, I'm actually really nervous right now being up here with all these people because, I mean, my students know, right? Like I idolize them. So this is her quote. It says, books are sometimes windows offering views of worlds that may be real or imagined, familiar or strange. These windows are also sliding glass doors, and readers have only to walk through them through an imagination to become part of whatever world has been created or recreated by the author. When lighting conditions are just right, however, a window can also be a mirror. Literature transforms human experience and reflects it back to us. And in that reflection, we see our own lives and experiences as part of the larger human experience. Reading them becomes a means of self-affirmation, and readers often seek their mirrors in books. So the question that Phil and I were thinking, I'll get back to it, I'm gonna find it. Which you guys kind of mentioned, right? All of your books provided windows for you that didn't exist before. But how do you think that they're sliding glass doors? So as an imagination of being part of a world, how do you think that allows, how do you think your books allow readers to see those sliding glass doors?
I guess I don't, if I'm talking about Hey Kiddo, I'm personally thinking about more of mirrors and windows, and specifically the windows of trying to take away the stigma of having someone in your family be dealing with addiction and suffering from addiction. Because I never saw, that as, like, growing up, we just saw like PSAs that said like, I learned it from watching you, like these really intense PSAs that just made you think that you as the child of the drug addict would too become a drug addict. And so I wanted to, number one, share my stories so that people would feel, kids especially, but adults as well, would feel less alone. And then also to my mother as a character in the book and how I represent her, I did so with care and compassion so that people could understand that she wasn't a bad person, she was a good person. She was a good person who made bad decisions. And those bad decisions kept her tumbling and stumbling through the rest of her life.
I don't need to share. So for me, I think, for me, the best books have always been books that are keys to compassion. I think of a book very much as a door, but not as a door it's a door that to me unlocks your heart. When you open a book, when you open the first page, it's like you enter maybe a different time or a different place, but you also enter someone else's head and someone else's heart. And for a small while, you live inside their skin. When something frightening is happening to that character, your heart races. When something sad is happening, you feel their pain. And to me, that is like your soul for a little while. It's someone else's soul. You see through their eyes. And when you do that, when you experience with someone else, when you feel their feelings, I think when you leave that book, hopefully that character stays with you at least a little. And hopefully because of that, you're a little more empathetic, a little more compassionate. And I love books of all kinds, and I think some books are entertainment, and I love them. But to me, the books that I think I write that mean the most to me, and the books that mean the most to me that I have read are books that change, that evoke compassion in some small way.
So I actually never thought that I would be traditionally published because the rejection letters that I got were not only many, but there was one in particular where an editor actually took the time to write a note at the bottom, and it was like literally the nastiest note. It was like, we're not interested in this good times black sitcom style of humor. And it was like, it's one thing to send a form letter, but I'm like, so he's like, wait, here, let me add something. Like, this is already painful. Let me write a note. And when you get a letter and you see a note, hey, someone's responding. And it's like, wow, that's really bad. So I published my first book in 1997 because, again, I wanted to do specifically African American kids as regular kids eating ice cream, playing Xbox, that kind of stuff. And so over the last 20 years, I've self-published like 30 books. And on the good side is if I did something like the Harlem Book Fair, I had a crowd. If I did something like here, where I was one of the few authors of color, and not specifically here, I'm not picking on Chapel, it's amazing. Amazing, absolutely amazing. But in the other fairs, not Chappaqua, like if I was one of the few authors of color, there would be people that would stop here and talk to you, and then they would come here, and then all of a sudden they would check their text message, look at the watch, come over, and then walk down to CeCe, go, hey, look, and I would just sit there for hours. And sell like 2 books. So I always wanted to do a book. Again, it's like, how can I find a book that still speaks to the African American kids who have never seen themselves portrayed, but can also go mainstream where there are white kids that will look and go, wow, Jordan Banks is cool. Like, I wish I had a friend like him. Or that you would take a book and give to another white kid, where that happens all the time. Like, we've we would probably all our lives skip, oh, here, read Anne of Green Gables, or read this, and like, okay, but it doesn't go the other way around, where, you know, where we give, oh, here, read, you know, Monster by, you know what I mean, by Walter Dean Myers. Like, it didn't really transfer the same way. So I always wanted to do a book like that, and I feel like specifically with having HarperCollins behind me and the notoriety, it's the first book that is a sliding door, so people could say, oh, I like Jordan Banks or Drew or some of the characters in the book.
And can we add that he just absolutely knocked it out of the park, the new kid, and succeeding in exactly what he wanted to do. So thank you for your work.
Thank you.
So when I think about sliding doors, in a sense, I think about the ideas of introducing kids to things that are actually happening to other kids, you know, in their community, or maybe not in their community, but like the community right next door. So I believe in, if you know anything about any of my books, they're all, well, the first two, are loosely inspired by real cases that happened to kids. So allegedly it was loosely inspired by a girl who was convicted of murder, and now she's in the juvenile justice system. So just the idea of exposing kids who never even thought about, you know, young girls actually being in prison. Even talking to educators, they sometimes forget that there are actually girls the same ages that they're teaching right now who are actually in prison. One of the best things that I like to talk about, particularly in my school visits, is the idea of empathy, which Padma brought up, is the idea of you teach empathy, you teach these books, you open and expose kids to the ideas of empathy, because empathy leads to compassion. Compassion would hopefully lead to action, and action will hopefully lead to change. We want kids to actually change the world that we live in, because us adults, like, we're done for, like, there's no changing us, it's a wrap. But at least if we can actually give this one moment to kids to actually say, hey, I remember this case that happened in allegedly, or I remember this case that happened in Monday's Not Coming. So when they go into the voting booth, or when they become adults, they can actually help change some of the policies that are actually hurting kids today. So that is my biggest goal in terms of exposing kids and using those sliding doors.
And I know we talk about this too, because we have this happen a lot with our books, because we write about specific things that a lot of people haven't experienced, but either we have or we know people in our communities who have. I go to, I'll do school visits. I just was in DC this week and did school visits where I had to walk through a metal detector at a middle school. A middle school. Why are 11-year-olds going through a metal detector? So I go in there, I introduce my book, and we have the same language. I don't need to introduce this book, they all get it. These kids know what it's like to have a resource officer, to feel like they're entering an airport or a prison every single day. So we have this shared language, but when I do school visits at places where they don't even know that that is a reality, often the reaction I get is, how did you come up with this? This was a really good science fiction book. And then I have to have the incredibly uncomfortable conversation of all of the science is real, you can all look it up, and then I watch everyone's brain break. And then they're like, wait, what? And they have this moment, and I think about that in terms of sliding glass doors too, is that sometimes imagination means you have to imagine things that are awful. And that is a hard thing that I hope a child has to do at some point in their life, is that I love fantasy, I love science fiction. That is a thing that I want to explore about how imagination is this wonderful positive force. But I think one way to build empathy is that people also need to imagine the bad things that can happen and know that maybe they're not happening to them, but that doesn't mean they're not happening to someone else. The most jarring interaction I've ever had with Anger is a Gift is it had been out 36 hours. So this is the day after it's out. I'm in DC at a book event, and this older gentleman comes up, and he's white, he's about 40, 45 years old, and he says, I read this last night, read it in one sitting. I loved it, but in particular you have this character, the main character's best friend, Esperanza, is based on me. She's a transracial adoptee. That has nothing to do with Rachel Dolezal, screw her, I hate her so much. If you've ever heard the term transracial, it's nothing to do with I'm the wrong race or whatever. It is a term for the adoption community for people like myself who are adopted out of our ethnic or racial groups and into another one. And it is an incredibly specific experience that I have had to deal with my whole life. And so I had never seen a transracial adoptee in a book, so I wrote one into this. And her experience plays a huge role in the plot of this book, even though she's a secondary character. And this man said, I love this book, and then he got really quiet and he said, my daughter is Latina, just like Esperanza, and I think I need to go home and have a really uncomfortable conversation because I don't think I've been a good dad. Can you sign my book? And I was just like, what do you do with that? First of all, like as an author, you're like, that's not something I intended at all, but like, I think about sliding glass doors in that sense too, is I had no intention for any parent to read this book and then be like, I need to reflect on my relationship with my child, but it happened. And that's the thing, none of us can control what happens when we put our books out into the world, but I think that was a sliding glass door for him, a door open that otherwise never would have opened. And then I signed his book and then just sat there for like a minute and was like, I'm uncomfortable. Yeah, so, I don't know, I think there's different ways to think about how she intended the theory as well, so.
Yes.
So I guess the book that better fits this question for me is El Deathbed. And when I wrote the book, I was thinking about, and it's definitely autobiographical, I definitely wanted to create something that, for deaf kids, kids with hearing aids, but more than that, I wanted to give hearing people the experience of what it was like to be deaf and to wear hearing aids. And the graphic novel format was perfect for this because I was able to use the speech balloons in lots of creative ways. So to show, there are moments in the book where the speech balloons are empty, which means my character isn't hearing. And so people who read the book have to be like me and look at all the visual clues in the panel, in the world, to figure out what's going on. So I wanted to give hearing people that experience to foster empathy and understanding and all that stuff. But even more than that, I wanted hearing people to read it and realize that people with disabilities are just like them. Same hope, same dreams. They can be funny, they can be angry, they can be every emotion, and I grew up my whole life seeing books and movies and TV shows, and anytime they had a deaf character, it was or any person with a disability, it felt like the attitude was very patronizing and or sappy and cornball and, oh, aren't you an inspiration? Isn't that child special? And I wanted to show, this is just a freaking normal kid with all of the same, whatever it is that makes a kid. And so that was my main goal with that book, and hopefully some of that came true. So that's a great question, by the way.
It's brilliant.
So we have one more question, then I think we might have time for a few questions after that, give or take. And it's related to what Jerry just touched on with your beautiful rejection letter that you received. Many times, or often, we've had adults say things, or grown-ups, or teachers say things to us in life that are jaw-dropping, that makes you think, whoa, you just said that out loud. So this is kind of like the best, worst thing that was ever said to you. Do you remember the thing that a teacher or grown-up ever said to you, like, I can't believe you said that to me, but you've used those words as almost as a source of inspiration to say, you know what? You are so wrong. So what is the best, worst thing a grown-up, a teacher, an adult has ever said to you in that light?
I'm sad to say that the grown-up in this case is my dad. So my dad is a doctor, and I love him, but he can be very, he's kind of stuck up, He's kind of, I don't know, he's very into prestige. And so I went to a college, I tried very hard my whole life to please him. And I went to a particular, more prestigious college just to please my dad. And anyway, I got through all 4 years of school with, I was a very academic kid. I wanted to make very good grades. And so at the end of 4 years, I went to the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia, which, at least in Virginia, is one of those, better schools. So anyway, I come home, and after my senior year, I have my transcript. My transcripts are filled with A's, they're beautiful, but there are 6 B's in my transcript. So I passed my transcript to my dad, "Dear Dad, here's my transcript. All 4 years, I did well." And he looks at it and he goes, 6 B's, huh? And that's all I got. So, that doesn't sound very major, but to me it was, and this was a man who had been pushing me to be a doctor and, to be this, whatever, a lawyer, whatever. So anyway, he said that. I went up to my room, I bawled my eyes out, and then I thought to myself, I'm never going to try to please this man again. I'm going to be an artist. He did not believe in art as a way to make a living or as a way to be anybody. And because I still haven't ended up on the cover of the New Yorker, I still have not met with his approval. But it doesn't matter. And so it wasn't necessarily a mean thing, but it was just like, well, wait a minute, So that was my sad story, but it was a happy ending.
You remind me, Jarrett, that I also got a rejection once where I was like, you wrote that down, which was, it is not believable that this main character can be both gay and Mexican. And then I was like, oh, I guess I didn't send you this book then, sorry. But I was 21, first book.
One or the other.
Yeah, one or the other, not both. That was a message to me. They were like, go erase one of those things about yourself. But as a teenager, I guess I was 12 years old. From an authority figure. It was the counselor in my junior high. I was ruthlessly bullied throughout elementary and junior high. I grew up in an extremely conservative part of California, which they do exist. They're all in the desert. My hometown voted, by the way, 98% in favor of Prop 8, which was the proposition to ban gay marriage. So that's the sort of environment I grew up in. And I was this boy who, at one point, rejected going to a Super Bowl party because I told my dad I wanted to finish this Jane Austen book and then read some poetry. So I was one of those kids where it was incredibly clear, and I had the limp wrist, and I was very affectionate and dramatic, and everyone knew, even though it was like no one ever confronted me directly, except when they were bullying me. So in 7th grade, I was just the target of everything all of the time. And this kid, particularly, his name is Curtis Tiegler. Yeah, I remember his name. And I looked him up on Facebook, and he's in jail, so who won? Me. I'm very petty. He was the worst. He was the worst of all. I'm very messy, I just want you to know that. He was the worst of all my bullies, and that particular day, he stapled a sign to my back. Yes, that is a proper reaction. You want to know the counselor said, why do you make yourself such a target? You should just man up. And I will never forget that, never. And I still to this day never forget that. And I think about what an authority figure, the power that their words have. But in that specific instance, that was when I was very aware, and a lot of kids go through this when they realize the adult is not actually on their side. And that in that moment, it was more important for him to protect the bully than it was to protect the bullied person. And I knew then, oh, I can't trust any of these people. Not any of them, I did trust the librarian, she was great. But it was that, she was, thanks librarian. It's that thing of, it'll always stay with me. And I thought about that writing Anger as a Gift, and there are a couple adult figures who do things like that. And who believe they're right, and they're putting a child on the right path, but you're not putting that child on the right path, you're protecting yourself,
So first, it was mostly like when I was younger, because I knew I wanted to be a writer at like 4. Like I just knew that immediately. And but I am also from kind of a West Indian household, and everyone was like, "Oh no, writers don't make any money. You can't do that." Which now it's amazing that I'm a writer now, and I eat, so I'm okay. So that was my biggest aha. But I think the second one was I went to a high school up here in Westchester called Hendrick Hudson High School. It was a predominantly white high school. I was one, I think, of 4 in my entire high school class of color. And I started a organization called SUCA, which was Students United for Color Awareness, something like that. And you know, the principal was really supportive. We did like fundraising events and stuff like that. And I remember I was walking through the hallway going to the bathroom, and my I passed by a US history teacher who, I guess they were talking about SUCA and talking about the idea of like, you know, why is she starting this thing? And he told his entire class, like, oh, well, you know, you should start a white student organization. And if you know anything about me, I definitely rolled up in that class like, say what? Like, what do you mean? Like, why would you need to start a white student organization? Y'all white. You already organized. You good. Like, and I always remember that because the idea of the audacity of this black girl coming along and trying to do something and shake things up. And that type of audacity is something that followed me throughout my entire career. I've worked in television for the past 15 years, also in publishing. There's also this idea of the audacity of you coming along and writing this book that has, what is it called? AABE, ABCDEFG, whatever. Like the audacity of this girl coming along and writing a book that's real and that's raw. How dare you? And I always sort of like say, like, you know, ha, I still won at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So I did a school visit. So I was an author already, had published several books, feeling pretty good about myself, got invited to a school, and I walk in, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna present to these kids, so I've got my confidence going, and I go to the receptionist, I say, hey, I'm Jarrett. Oh, good, we've been waiting for you. And I have my portfolio, and so she says, come with me. We walk, and then we go in this room and open the door, and I'm expecting to see like this, like an auditorium full of kids. And it's this little room. And I look at her, and she looks at me, and and she goes, aren't you here to fix the copier? Wah, wah, wah. It's like, no, I'm the author that you guys are now going to pay me double. You know, so that's one. And then, so even selling New Kid, I got a rejection. So that was not easy to do, you know, like just because I had it and I liked it, it was the book I wanted to do, I still got rejected plenty. And one of the editors wrote back that, oh yeah, we don't want to take this book on because we feel that is a polemic. And I was like, Siri, what does polemic mean? And it's like, oh, it's an attack on a group of people or an idea or something. I'm like, what am I attacking? So if you read New Kid, there's a scene where the teacher finds Jordan's sketchbook and goes through, and that conversation that she is the same thing. She goes, Jordan, I find your sketchbook to be a polemic. And he's like, Siri, what does polemic mean? And he looks it up, and that's where that's from. So there's still a lot of work to be done.
So for me, there are two, and one of them is just very recent. So I'm really grateful that my book is a global read aloud. But recently, I've had teachers write to me and say how several things, but not such nice things, because they feel that their children shouldn't have to. Who cares what's happening in India? And you know, why should they have to put themselves in the shoes of kids who are homeless or kids who are scavenging on rubbish dumps for a living? And I think one of the worst things was an Indian person walking up to me and saying that I had no business saying these kinds of things about our culture. And especially because the father in the book is violent, and it's done in a way that is, you don't see any graphic violence on the page. You feel the emotion, I hope, but you don't see it because I'm not into graphic violence on the page. And for me to have someone who, you know, we all make our own assumptions, but to have somebody who you smile at them, they look like they might actually want your book, maybe for the best reason. And I have had lots of brown people walk past me because they don't want my book either. But when they smile, they make eye contact, and they walk up to you, and then they tell you that they're so upset by your most recent book because it shows up your culture in a light that doesn't exist, and blah, blah, and then it's part of your own life, and that first scene is drawn from what happened to you. I think that was really hard, and I don't know that there's a good side to it, except that I felt just the way that I felt once when this woman, I always knew I wanted to be an oceanographer, like you said. I was, a writer when I was 4 years old. I told you what I was now, but I always did. I really loved writing. And then anyway, I ended up becoming an oceanographer because my family, being Indian, told me that I had to do something to make my money. Oh, they didn't say that. It was, inside. So I did oceanography. Then I ended up being the only woman and the only person of color, and the only person under 6 feet tall, and the only person on non-native German speaker on a vessel, right? And I was the boss. And that experience taught me a great deal. But I remember at one point, and so there is a side of me that is quite straightforward and passionate. And one white woman who is also an oceanographer and was a friend of mine came up to me and said, every time you speak with passion, people shut off because all they see of you is fire. And I remember most of my friends when I came to America, some people will say they had the white default. Mine was anything but the white default, right? I had everybody who was a friend was other in some way most of the time. And then I thought about how we are perceived when we speak with passion, or when we speak with strength and passion, when we write books that are intense, and we're told that our books are powerful and angry. And I think they are just powerful and strong, and they are voices, and you need just to experience them from the inside. And maybe there is anger, but like CeCe said, we can be angry too. Everybody can be angry. And it doesn't mean it's more, or it's violent, or it's suddenly something else. And I think when she said that, it made me think, I am never going to change.
So I was consistently bullied for my entire childhood for being an effeminate boy who didn't like to play sports, and I liked to draw. And I put some of that bullying in Hey Kiddo. I refrained from putting all of the bullying in because I'm like, this kid's already going through so much in this book, but I did specifically include some of the more brutal bullying that I was experienced. And like Mark, I went down a Facebook rabbit hole.
Yeah.
And because there's this great episode of 30 Rock where Liz Lemon goes to her high school reunion. And she's going there thinking she was always put upon, and then she turned out like she was the bully because she was like the smart kid and the jocks, like she was mean to the jocks. And so I wanted to approach these bullies with compassion and thinking like, maybe they weren't so bad. Fortunately, I have lost their names to time. I can't tell you their names, but I have my yearbook, and I looked up their names, and then I looked it up on Facebook. I said, screw these jerks. They're awful still. What shouldn't have come to a surprise, right? Like they're not going to change. Like, oh, they are just dry, and so that scene is in Hey Kiddo, and I hope that their children read it. Their pops.
Yeah.
And then, oh, you know what? So here's a good piece of advice, and I'm about to. So earmuffs if you're younger, and your parents don't want you to have salty language. One of the great pieces of advice I had in writing Hey Kiddo is I was struggling with how to write about some of the people who acted very poorly. And I was at a David Sedaris book signing, and I built up the courage to ask him how to write about this. And I told him about my father who took off before I was born. And I didn't meet him until I was 17. and how do I deal with how I'm going to write this, and they're going to see it. And he said, here's the thing. If you live your life like you're an asshole, you're going to be written about like you're an asshole. So just go home and write the damn book. And I was like, wow, you're right, David Sedaris. You know, so okay, earmuffs off. And so one of the greatest pieces of fire that was put within me. So I was 18 years old, art school student, really eager, and one of our teachers brought in an art director or an artist rep to come in to meet with students, and I got dressed up to meet with them and show them my work, and they were looking at my work, and he said, well, what kind of art do you want to make? And I was like, oh, golly, mister, you can make my dreams come true. Like I said, I really want to write and illustrate children's books for a living. He went, you and everybody else. Next. And then I was like, oh, yeah, I'm going to write about you just as you are, as David Sedaris told me to.
Cool.
So we've actually run about 10 to 15 minutes over, which is kind of cool. And we were going to leave time for Q&A, but we don't have time for Q&A. So when you visit everyone's tables to purchase multiple copies of their books now, feel free to ask them like all the questions that you want. But before I go, as an author up here who hasn't gotten to talk about my book, is now my second to like say, give a little shameless self-promotion. So I have a future hopeful Project Lit book coming out next year, I hope. And it's an LGBTQ middle grade, and it's a book that says that, you know, queer kids play sports too, and it's the book I wish I had when I was a kid. So if you know of any middle grade kids who could use a book like High Five for Glenn Burke, I have postcards at my table. You can't buy my book, you can buy their books now, but you can just get a nice postcard, so you can come say that. But first of all, we'd like to thank all y'all. This was fantastic.